Hey guys, I'm Sun. I'm a privacy and a security researcher, and you're watching the Privacy Guides. This happened. The Parler.com website is down. Apple and Google has removed the Parler apps from the app stores, and that got a lot of people that are pro freedom of speech very upset, and I can totally relate to why. So in this episode, I want to talk about what the Parler shutdown means for freedom of speech. I'm going to try to not have a stance on this and kind of just share facts, and I'll let you guys make up your own minds about what's going on and how we should deal with this kind of stuff moving forward. In last episode, I mentioned why it was time to drop WhatsApp and switch to Signal. And thankfully, that is really a trending topic right now, and a lot of people are starting to question Facebook and its subsidiaries such as Instagram and WhatsApp, and I think that that's really a great thing. Now, some of you did express the need for an alternative, and I totally understand. We're social beings. We need to relate to each other. We need to exchange ideas, and social media has been a very useful tool for that. It's been a very dangerous tool as well, but more on that a little later in this episode. So full disclosure, I had never looked into Parler. I'm not a big social media user myself. I really love what we're developing together here on YouTube, and I love those conversations. But I found myself leaving Facebook because of privacy, and it actually has done me a lot of good psychologically to not be hooked on these kind of dopamine-driven addictive platforms. But again, that's probably a subject for another episode. But nonetheless, you guys mentioned Parler as a freedom of speech, more open, potentially privacy conscious alternative to Facebook. So I decided to dig in, and here's what I've found. Parler is an American microblogging social networking company that is co-founded by a few people, one of which is Rebecca Mercer. And that kind of piqued my interest. Rebecca Mercer is the daughter, let me see if I have this in my notes. Sorry about that. Geez, did I put that? Yes. Is the daughter of Robert Mercer, who is a hedge fund manager and the co-founder of now dead political data analytics firm Cambridge Analytica. So, wow. Oh man, that is so spicy. So Parler is co-founded by the daughter, who, by the way, apparently is in good terms with her father, who co-founded Cambridge Analytica, which was used in attempts, or actually succeeded in rigging the US elections in the context of the Trump election. So just for that reason, Cambridge Analytica was very, very bad for privacy. It used our very personal information against us. So for that reason alone, I would never, ever, ever use Parler. Now, putting that aside for a second, a lot of the people behind Parler have very strong political agendas, which means they are very biased. We all are. Human beings, including myself, we are biased beings. That being said, having such a biased leadership with similar opinions lead a platform that is intended for freedom of speech makes no sense at all for me. So, by the way, I'll get to freedom of speech a little later in this episode, but in the context of this specific project of Parler, it's really mind-blowing. I am speechless. So talking about freedom of speech, give me a second here. Should freedom of speech be moderated or censored? And if so, where should we draw the line? That is a question that, to be honest, I have no answer. I would love to hear you in the comments on this. To put it very naively, I am against violence. I am for using our words, using our consciousness to unite human beings and to understand our differences and to work them out. Working them out does involve freedom of speech. It's normal that we're angry about things. We are emotional beings. But freedom of speech, and that's maybe the only opinion that I'll place here, in my opinion, freedom of speech should not lead to violence. Freedom of speech should lead to some level of compromise, some level of understanding, should lead to empathy. So should freedom of speech be moderated or censored? I mean, I'll leave that up to you. I think that we should have a conversation around this. I've researched this in the context of social media platforms that I'll discuss later today and later in this series. But it's a very, very challenging problem to solve. I mean, I have people that drop very hateful hatred comments on the privacy guides. I have people who recommend to you guys that you should pirate Little Snitch, which is against my values. I think that we should pay for software. I think that we should encourage developers that are developing privacy conscious tech. But should I delete those comments? And I think until now, I may have deleted a few comments, but very, very few. I mean, honestly, I think it's maybe one or two. And it was because those comments were very, very violent. And that's kind of where I drew the line. But even that, I felt really shitty about myself because I'm a huge believer in freedom of speech. But yeah, the problem with social media, especially at the scale at which platforms such as Facebook and Twitter and even Parler are operating, the problem, and even actually Facebook, Google search, I'll talk about that in a second. The problem is confirmation bias. As I said earlier in this episode, we humans tend to be very biased. And the older we get, the stronger the bias becomes. And when we use platforms such as Facebook or Google search, these platforms use very sophisticated artificial intelligence to profile us and then deliver content that is aligned with our biases, and that confirms our biases. And then we start believing that those biases are clearly and undeniably true. And if this occurs on social networks, and everyone on that social network likes, shares, comments positively about our ideology, it's very easy to develop a confirmation bias and start thinking that we are undeniably right about a specific idea or topic. And if these comments or these interactions promote violence or hatred, it's kind of the perfect storm here to get people very upset about things. And if there is no counterbalance, if there is no other side to the story, well, it just keeps on making that flywheel turn. A solution that I see to this, and that I see to most problems that we see, such as environmental problems, violence problems, stuff like this, is we humans have to start operating at a human scale. Things have gotten so abstracted. Just think about the governance in a company like Facebook. There are so many different managerial levels. People don't feel accountable anymore. And in the context of social media, it's kind of the same. But the sadness in this is that a lot of people sharing ideas that are good for humanity that can really make that flywheel turn and initiate change. And we've seen that in the context of social media. But the opposite is as true, unfortunately. So I'm not sure how to solve this. I think that we need to slow down. We need to take steps back. We need to use that gift that humans have that is conscious. And we need to figure these things out. I mean, but one thing is for sure, smaller communities tend to be more tightly knit. And yeah, anyways, I don't have all those answers, but in the context of the internet and in the context of censorship, and now this is going to be kind of the technical segment of this episode, the internet is such a beautiful piece of engineering because it is decentralized. What I mean by decentralized is all different parts of the internet interoperate together, but are also independent. Meaning we could operate a small internet in the context of a country that is not necessarily exactly the same as the internet in another country. And that can be used for good or for bad. Now, I'm not expressing an opinion here, but in the context of China, with the Great Firewall of China, well, the internet in China is not necessarily the same internet as what we have here in Canada or the United States, for instance. Not the same as in Europe either. But the beauty of it is that it is decentralized, and that is really great for freedom. Now, the other great aspect of this decentralization, especially when you merge this with the context of open source, is that pretty much anyone can spawn a server and host ideas, a website, a blog on that server. And that is such a powerful concept, such a powerful gift that we have. Now, the problem in recent years is that everyone has started to migrate to much larger platforms such as Amazon Web Services or app stores. Humans want to become incredibly powerful. We want to scale things so very quickly. And because of that, we're taking every shortcut possible, invading people's privacy through, targeting of ads, using very abstracted technological stacks such as Amazon Web Services instead of spawning our own servers. And what that means is a few tech giants now have power, incredible levels of power, to decide what message can go through and what message can't. And I'm not expressing an opinion about Parler here, although I have to admit I did, saying I would not use Parler. But anyways, Parler can be taken down because Parler can be taken down at the domain name service level, so DNS level. It can be taken down from the app stores, and if it uses the Amazon Web Services infrastructure, Amazon can just pull the plug. If Parler was operating at a human scale and was operating its own servers, it could quite easily respawn itself. It could maybe not support this extreme growth that they were having, but it could still exist. So decentralizing the internet and decentralizing how we host apps, services on the internet is really key. And that brings me to Mastodon. So there is an open source, decentralized, federated social media platform called Mastodon. Full disclosure, I haven't dug into it much, but I did look at its founder. As you've seen, I always approach these things from a governance perspective. And Eugene Rocco, sorry if I messed up the name, is a young developer with a big dream who is sustaining himself through a project called Patreon. So people are essentially sponsoring him so that he can go about developing that platform. And Mastodon looks pretty amazing. And the really cool aspect of Mastodon is it uses a concept called federation. That means that everyone can run their own server, but the servers can start talking to each other. And a really simple analogy to this is email. You might be on Gmail, I might have my own email server, but we can interoperate, we can communicate together. And the same applies to Mastodon. And not all of you know, but I'm also publishing this content on PeerTube, and I run my own PeerTube instance that also uses that same Fediverse and concept of federation. So I really believe that the future of freedom of speech will live on platforms like that. Will live on platforms that are decentralized and federated, which means we can decide to block access to another server if we disagree, but everyone gets to keep their own thing, but that thing operates at a human scale, and that's pretty amazing. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it for this episode. I hope this gives you context as to the impact of the Parler shutdown. What's its impact in the context of freedom of speech? I hope it shows that we should always take the time to investigate the governance behind a project to make up our own mind as to if that project is marketed in a specific way or if it has really deep values, and yeah, I would like to end this with a dream I had last night, and maybe some of you are going to tune out here, but I still wanted to share this. It's kind of personal, but sorry about that. I felt like I had to share it. In my dream, it's actually the morning here, and my girlfriend's probably still sleeping, but I woke up and I had this dream in mind. I was at a friend's house, and we heard some man being very violent with his children. And to me, being violent to a child is unacceptable. That's how my values are set. So we decided to go and knock on the door of that person's house and try to figure out what was happening. And clearly that person was in distress. Things got very violent, and I ended up I didn't spawn the violence per se, but things got heated up and got violent, and I ended up kind of beating the shit out of the guy, which, by the way, is very ironic because I'm a nerd, so that's clearly a dream. But nonetheless, and what happened next is that this guy and someone else from his family, they were kind of messed up, and they told us that proverbial, I'm going to find you and I'm going to kill you, and that's the kind of stuff that we hear in movies all the time. And we're really a construction of mass media, but that's probably the subject for another episode. So we were left with a dilemma, as again, we see in movies a lot. We had to either finish them up, right, in order to not be killed in the future, hopefully, or accept and live in fear. And those are two very shitty options. Now, what happened next is interesting, and that's the part that I really wanted to share with you guys. My girlfriend studies theories of motivation, and she studies the psychological human needs such as affiliation, autonomy, and competence. And she's going to laugh when she hears that. But so the guys that we had just beaten up, they were there on the ground, and I started using empathy instead. And I started trying to figure out why that person was suffering so much and why that person was making their child suffer because of that. And I started listening. So I kind of stopped or tried to take a step back from those biases. So I tried to take a few steps back and tried to understand why that person thought differently and how I could help that person instead of resorting back to violence. And I hope more of us do that. Anyways.